Find the derivative of y equals f of x divided by cosine of x, then evaluate y prime of pi over 3, where f of pi over 3 is negative 3, and f prime of pi over 3 is a 5. So y here is the quotient of two functions, f of x and cosine of x. The numerator is unknown, f of x, the denominator is known as cosine of x. We can use the quotient rule here for the derivative. Y prime, or dy dx, will be the derivative of the numerator, we will call that f prime of x, times the denominator left alone, minus the numerator left alone, times the derivative of the denominator, which is a negative sine x, and all of this over the denominator squared. Now I'm going to rewrite this. I'll put the cosine x first and then f prime of x. And then a double negative, so a positive sine x, f of x. And all of this is over cosine squared of x is another way to write that. So there's our derivative y prime, or dy dx. The next thing to do is evaluate this at pi over 3. So y prime of pi over 3 equals 2. Let's plug a pi over 3 in for each of the x's. Cosine of pi over 3, f prime of pi over 3, plus sine of pi over 3, and f of pi over 3, all over cos squared of pi over 3, which means to take the cosine of pi over 3 first, and then square the result after. Now the cosine of pi over 3 is a 1/2. F prime of pi over 3 and f of pi over 3, those are going to be determined by this stuff here. So f prime of pi over 3 is a 5. Sine of pi over 3 is a root 3 over 2, and f of pi over 3, found over there, is a negative 3. All this is divided by the cosine of pi over 3, which is a 1/2, and then quantity squared. So y prime of pi over 3 will equal to, in the numerator we will have 5 times 1/2, that'll give us 5/2. And we will have a negative 3 times the root 3 over 2, so that'll give us negative 3 root 3 over 2. In the denominator we have a 1/2 squared. 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, 1/4. In the numerator we can combine those. Those are already over a common denominator. So then combine over that common denominator. And now we can reciprocate and multiply the 1/4 to become 4 over 1. Now before I multiply it, that 4 can reduce with that 2, 1 in the numerator, 1 in the denominator, leave us a 2 in the numerator. Since they're multiplying everything else, they can reduce like that before I distribute. Now in the numerator I'm going to distribute that 2 in, and that will give us 10 minus 6 root 3. The denominator will just be a 1, so no need to write that. 10 minus 6 root 3.